The post-World War I situation proved a devastating economic and social situation for the democratic governments of the West. For alternative political ideologies like communism and socialism on the left and fascism on the right, the situation that followed World War I proved to be very fertile ground for starting new political and social experiments with populations of Europe. One of the big changes, and one of the ones that frightened a lot of European countries, was the Bolshevik Revolution that took place in the Soviet Union. The Bolshevik government under Vladimir Lenin had promised bread and peace and land to the people, and they had responded to that by throwing out the Tsarist government and by embracing communism. Lenin, however, didn't live long to oversee this, and when Lenin died, the brief power struggle that followed brought to power Joseph Stalin. Stalin was a bureaucrat. He worked within the system. He hadn't really been a hero of the revolution in terms of leading the armies or anything like that. He'd been the general secretary of the party. But in that position, he's able to isolate his foes. He's able to oust Leon Trotsky, who looked like a much more natural successor to Lenin. And eventually, he's even able to isolate his allies, eliminate them, and seize almost single control of the Soviet Union. He then instituted sweeping changes to the economy. He collectivizes agriculture. He puts any farmers who disagree with him off the land, calls them kulaks, calls them the privileged, the do-nothings, and ships them off to Siberia or to the Arctic Circle. He does the same sort of thing, instituting what he calls 5-year plans in industry, where he consolidates Soviet industry. He forces through changes in the sense that the Soviet Union is forced into becoming an industrialized nation. It's successful, but the cost is very high. The collectivization efforts of the farms, the forced industrialization leads to lots of deaths, lots of imprisonments of people who disagree with Stalin, and eventually with a Stalin who essentially has eliminated all of his foes and has a singular control over the entire government. The Great Depression in the West doesn't affect the Soviet Union in the same way because it's a contained economy, but Stalin comes to see Western democracies and the Western powers, and especially Western fascist powers, as being his mortal foes. And so he becomes less and less tolerant of any sort of opposition to his control. In the mid-1930s, he's going to launch a series of purges in which he has his police hunt down and arrest any intellectuals, anti-business leaders, and most notably, any military leaders who disagree with his leadership. He has hundreds of thousands of people put into prison, and he has tens of thousands of people put to death. Again, what we have then by the end of the 1930s is a Soviet Union that is under the ironclad control of Joseph Stalin. It's also one that's been very compromised, and we'll see this when the war breaks out. A lot of the intellectual leadership of the Soviet Union has been eliminated, and the Soviets are in a very poor situation to encounter the first blast of the war. At about the same time that Stalin was coming to power in the Soviet Union, Benito Mussolini was making a play for power in Italy. Mussolini's on the opposite end of the political spectrum, though. Mussolini's a fascist. He's right-wing. He's hardcore conservative. He actually started off as a socialist, but was converted during World War I and actually became a hunter of the socialists in Italy afterwards. He was very pro-war. He had become very militaristic. He was very supportive of a conservative government response. And Mussolini is going to make the most, again, out of the Treaty of Versailles. It becomes a sort of return point for these critics of the system to go to. In order to get the Italians to join the Entente forces in the war, they made an awful lot of promises that eventually they didn't keep. They denied Italy land, they denied Italy resources, and Mussolini's going to play on all of this. He's going to promise to return the Italians to greatness. He's going to promise a return to the Roman Empire. But he's going to favor the military, he's going to call for expansion of industry, he's going to call for expansion of the military, and eventually physical expansion as well, launching invasions in North Africa, in Ethiopia, in places that the Italians had been embarrassed during the great age of imperialism. And Mussolini's famous black shirt supporters will take control of Italy and convert it to the first of the fascist nations. Right-wing, dictatorial, single leadership style government. Mimicking Mussolini will be Adolf Hitler in Germany. Hitler actually was a veteran of the war. Though he was born in Austria, he had served in the German army. He survived the entire war, an almost amazing feat. He had entered early, was still alive at the end, had been wounded several times during the war, but he comes out of the war very disillusioned. And he is quickly going to buy into some of the conspiracy theories that said that the Germans had been sold out. I mean, they were so unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles that one of the justifications that many Germans reached for was a conspiracy theory that it was Jewish intellectuals and industrialists, it was international bankers, that it wasn't really a flaw or a failing of the military. The military hadn't really been defeated, but it had been sold out by these other elements. Hitler's going to play to that. He's going to join a small party, the German Working Men's Party. It will change its name to the National Socialist Working Man's Party, Nazi for short. And he's going to call for overthrowing the Weimar government that replaced the Kaiser's government. He's going to call for a violent takeover. He's going to serve a little bit of time in jail. Eventually he's going to become more mainstream, run for political office, and drive home his message that Germany was undercut, that Germany should return to its power days, that Germany should throw off the Versailles Treaty and should go it alone once again. Hitler is going to benefit tremendously from the Great Depression. His National Socialist Working Man's Party is going to stay a real minority party. Germany practices multi-party politics. And the Nazis are a small force until the Great Depression kicks in. And by 1933, Adolf Hitler is going to be able to gather enough votes. His message of nationalism, of conservatism, of German superiority and the rights of Germans is going to be so attractive that he's going to be asked to form a government. And after he becomes the German Chancellor, he's going to take steps to consolidate power, like Stalin did, like Benito Mussolini did, making himself leader of the military and the civil arms of the government, eliminating his political foes, and concentrating his message of anti-Semitism, of German greatness, and of flying in the face of the Treaty of Versailles. He's going to actually reoccupy territories in Germany that the treaty said had to be demilitarized. He's going to openly break limitations on Germany's military, the size of its navy, the size of its air force, the size of its standing army. And eventually, by decades in, by the end of the 1930s, he's even going to be launching aggressive actions to return all German speakers to the German nation. But this means undoing some of the territorial allotments of the Treaty of Versailles. The final one of these happens in September of 1939 when Hitler demands back those German-speaking territories of Poland, and when the democracies of Europe stand against him, he launches an armed invasion, and this then kicks off officially the Second World War.